Great. In 7 more years, we're going to be under attack by intergalactic space aliens bent on conquering the world and enslaving mankind. I guess I'd better start looking into early retirement benefits. Not a big ancient DOS game today, but one I've wanted to take a quick look at for a while now. Galactix. And it's a quirky little thing that's only really going to occupy about an hour of your time should you choose to play it, after which you'll have pretty much seen everything the game has to offer, but it does have a little more depth than you might expect, so since I don't have much to say about it, let's just get into the game stats. Galactix was created and released by Cygnus Multimedia Productions in 1992. Yes, that's the same company that developed Raptor Call of the Shadows after changing their name to Cygnus Studios, though nowadays the company is known as Mountain King Studios. The game's a one-player 2D shooter, supporting MCGA 320x200 256 color graphics, PC speaker and sound blaster sound effects, and ad-lib music. As for its current release date, well, this is going to depend on if you want one of the original DOS versions or a modern Windows port. The last DOS version of this game, version 1.5, was released for free in 1993, possibly due to the fact that the previous shareware versions were all completely unrestricted, relying on the honesty of the player to either pay for the game or remove it from their system. Eventually, a modernized Windows port was created, which plays a little faster and has updated sound and music. This version of the game has always been shareware, but limited to the first 15 levels until you buy the registered game, which nowadays costs $5 and can be obtained from the Mountain King Studios website at www.nking.com. If you want the free DOS version, that's going to be a little trickier to find, but if you search the net for the zip file it was distributed as, galac15.zip, you're bound to come across a copy. And I do actually own the registered Windows version, and it's kind of hard for me to say which one is better. Well, overall, the Windows version is superior, but you can't use the middle mouse button in it, and the aspect ratio feels a bit squished. And I say if you like the DOS version, you should at least try the shareware Windows version. Also, as a matter of interest, when the older DOS versions were still being sold, a portion of all the sales was going towards saving the rainforests. Mind you, I have no idea how much that actually amounted to, but it's an interesting piece of trivia nonetheless. As far as the story is concerned, the game supposedly takes place in the year 2019, but since we're quite a ways away from having space fighters and the like, the year is probably best ignored. In any case, just as the last tree in the world's rainforest is wiped out, a malevolent race known as the Zydus take over the airwaves and announce that they're about to enslave the entire human race. Obviously, since the world has such a strong military presence and the ability to construct sizable space stations, they figure the smartest thing to do is send out a single Epsilon-class stellar interceptor to take out every single one of the Zydus fighters. You ever get the feeling that video games in general depict governments as being enormously stupid? Whatever. Since this is a game, the enemies can't hit the broadside of a garbage scow, let alone your tiny little fighter. But since you're limited to flying side to side, you don't exactly have a lot of options for dodging shots either, so I guess you make do with what you got. And speaking of that, you do have more than just a couple puny little pea shooters. You also have the ability to launch missiles and bombs. Now, the missiles do tremendous damage and can take out most enemies in a single hit, while the bombs are essentially the same as missiles, but affect the entire playfield in one fell swoop. Though enemies taken out with bombs generally don't drop power-ups, and it takes a moment for the bomb to explode, so you want to be careful about using them. Actually, picking up missiles and bomb power-ups is a little interesting. Since you can't fly forwards and backwards, just side to side, your ship has a special device known as the Claw, which you can use to retrieve power-ups as they float away from you. And one thing I find neat about this too is that if you have a power-up latched onto the Claw, yet the level's about to end because you've defeated all the enemies, the game actually waits for you to retrieve the power-up before moving on, which is a very nice touch considering how annoying it would be if the level could end while you were still retrieving something. Now, the game actually has 100 levels to it, referred to as waves. All waves come in sets of 5 as you progress through. The first wave in each set of 5 has you fighting a group of weak ships, the second wave has medium-powered ships, the third wave has powerful ships with shots that can slide side to side, the fourth wave has a mix of all 3 different kinds of ships, and the fifth wave has a boss encounter, which when destroyed will drop a super weapon power-up to upgrade your main guns. You also have special boss encounters for waves 49 and 100, where you'll fight extremely large bosses that shoot massive quantities of shots. Thankfully, this is not a one-hit kill game. At the right side of the screen, you have an energy gauge showing you how much more damage you can take before being destroyed. This gauge has 3 zones on it, green, amber, and red. If you take damage but are still in the green, nothing bad happens. If you take damage and enter the amber or red zone, you lose 1 level of your upgraded guns if you have any. Once you're in the red zone, it's possible for enemies to drop energy restoration power-ups, though so long as you're not holding the fire button down, you'll slowly regenerate your energy naturally. A good tactic when you take damage is to stop holding the fire button down and just rapidly press it instead so that you'll be able to attack, yet still regenerate energy. Though speaking of the upgraded guns, they're pretty darn powerful. The first upgrade gives you a steady, fast-moving stream from the center of your ship. The second upgrade gives you a couple of side-firing streams of the same kind. And the third and final upgrade gives you side-firing lasers that are really powerful. Of course, to actually get to the third upgrade level requires quite a bit of effort, especially in the later levels where a single enemy shot is pretty much guaranteed to knock out 1 weapon upgrade. One thing that's pretty neat is that the upgrade power-ups are always based on the upgrades you had when the power-up was created. What I mean is, let's say you have the first 2 upgrade levels, destroy a boss, but then lose both of those upgrades before you can get the power-up that was dropped. When you finally do get that power-up, it'll actually bring you up to the 3rd upgrade level, because it was created while you still had 2 upgrades. And another neat thing too is that after the 49th wave, you'll head to a space station and get your ship refitted with some new equipment, which will automatically upgrade you to the first weapon upgrade level every time you start a wave without it. Which is a good thing, considering the second half of the game has much stronger enemies than the first half. And yeah, there's really not much more to say about the game, so here's just a few general tips to help you out if you decide to play it for yourself. Firstly, go for bombs over missiles. The bombs are much more useful than the missiles, especially in the later missions where you can use them during boss waves to quickly eradicate virtually every enemy except the boss, which you just have to shoot briefly afterwards to destroy it to get its power up. Bombs are also useful for taking out the third of every 5 waves, since the enemies in those particular waves are the hardest of the bunch. Another good tip is to learn to use the mouse controls. Now, the keyboard and joystick controls do offer a bit more precision, but the mouse controls offer much faster movement, allowing you to get out of bad situations more easily. Granted, if you're playing the DOS version in DOSBox, chances are you're not going to be able to get the joystick controls to work properly regardless of your timed interval setting or whatever. My biggest tip though is to save your missiles for when you lose your weapon upgrades, and for the 2 massive boss encounters, because those are pretty much the only times you'll ever need the extra firepower. The rest of the time, your main gun should suffice. And yeah, that's Galactix. As I said, it's not a big game by any means, but it's certainly a neat little thing, and worth trying at least once, even just for the heck of it. Of course, because of how basic it is, it doesn't really have much staying power, and an hour or 2 is probably the most you're going to get out of this game before you move on to something else. But at least it'll be a fun hour or 2. DOSBox settings are fairly simple. Just set cycles to max, manually set the core to dynamic mode, and you're good to go. One thing to keep in mind too is that some copies of the game floating around the net have it pre-extracted from its installer, but without the proper configuration files present, which means if you try to run the game, it'll just crash back to DOS. So even if the files are already pre-extracted, be sure you run the installer first so that the configuration files are properly created. And that's all for today's episode of Ancient DOS Games. Next week for episode 98, we're going to take a look at the most requested game currently on my request list. Though it happens to be a strategy game, so I'm not really looking forwards to it. But since it's considered to be one of the best games ever made, let alone one of the best games made for DOS, maybe it won't be so bad. And if you think you know which game it is, then send your guess to adg@pixelships.com and tune in next Saturday to see if I can actually survive for more than a few minutes.